This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
The biggest icon in podcasting.
Welcome in, everybody, to this week's edition of DocNJock. I am the Doc, John Macaroon, looking forward to debriefing with my guy, Adam, the Jock Strozinski. The Detroit Lions were 30 minutes away from the Super Bowl. It happened. It was almost there. The Detroit Lions played one of their best halves of football, arguably maybe even in franchise history, in the first half. Unfortunately, a football game is 60 minutes, and when they got punched in the mouth, they flopped. Not only did they flop, they bent over, tore all their ligaments, and they did not get up for the 10 count. Eliminated. But we'll react. We'll talk about how we experienced that contest, a nightmare scenario for the Doc, maybe a silver lining. We'll talk all about it. Joining me, as always, to debrief, break down what the hell that game against the 49ers means, is my guy, Adam, the Jock Strozinski. Cuz, let me just tell you this. I did not go out to California. Let me tell you what happened. Thursday night, maybe I look at it and it's crazy, but I battled. I am a little bit of a nervous flyer. I am somebody that is not comfortable flying, but I dealt with it. I said, okay, it's going to be good. Thursday night, entertaining guests with family and friends, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh no, this is not good. I don't feel good. And I come down, and all the media got sick all in a row. First it was the news, but it was like 3 weeks ago. They missed the Dallas trip. Then it was another blog. They missed a whole week of media, and finally it hit me. I had 102 fever, felt like I couldn't move. I'm like, oh my God, took all this medicine. And luckily, I had my wife, Andrea, prepare all the trip and fully insured. And by the time Friday night hit, it was like, you know what? She's like, John, not letting you go. So fully canceled. And I'm like, whatever. But I rested and got to watch the game, still cover it, but fully exhausted. It took me now, if you listen to our wrestling podcast, I think you'll hear me coughing through it. My voice is now just coming back. I went too hard and got the flu, but I'm recovered, and actually sitting on the couch from Friday till Monday was just what the doctor ordered. I feel refreshed. I feel so much better. So 2024, I got to book days off where a day off is not actually writing 4 articles and still calling it work. So I crashed, but I recovered. The good Lord did not let me see in person the Detroit Lions collapse, because at halftime, cause maybe I jinxed it, I don't know, I started looking at flights in Vegas, and it was outrageous. I almost had a heart attack. It would have been $2,500 to fly there, $2,500 to stay there. I was like, Andrea, I need a loan. And I was like, okay, we're going to the Super Bowl. Because the crash that the Lions had coincided with the crash that I had, it is crazy. I thought that they would go, if they were going to lose, they would go toe-to-toe with the 49ers, and they would eventually fall short because they got more talent. But in the end, once the 49ers were swinging, you saw each and every wart that the Detroit Lions had all year was exposed at the worst possible times. I was shocked, and until the news broke on Tuesday, it actually was worse for me the way I felt about it until Tuesday. It was shock. It was dismay. It was like the feeling of having something you really want and having it ripped away from you. Luckily, some good news for the Lions hit on Tuesday, but for me, it was shock. It was disgust and anger. It was frustration. It was like, this is worse than if they got blown out. This is like getting the taste of the naughtiness, only to have the person leave the room and say, sorry, we're not hooking up tonight. I don't feel it anymore. It was the biggest tease in sports history in Detroit. That's the best way to describe it. Right there on the precipice of glory, and they blew it. I couldn't believe it.
Well, this is why. The big issue is they were 30 minutes away from winning a Super Bowl. I believe if they won this game, if they beat San Francisco, they were going to go on and they were going to beat Kansas City. I was screaming it throughout the house going into halftime. I was like, if they win this game, they're winning the Super Bowl. They match up so well against Kansas City. They could take advantage of Kansas City. With the way that this team played in that first half, I think they could have beat the Ravens if they matched up against the Ravens. They played such a good first half to only come back in the second half and lay the biggest dud. It was the highest of highs, and then it was the most frustrating lowest of lows. And I think that's probably the best word to describe it. That final 30 minutes of that football game were frustrating on so many different avenues. It was unreal. Whether it was wide receivers dropping balls, whether it was coaching decisions, whether it was running backs fumbling, whether it was just play calling in general, or the inability to make stops. You found yourself screaming at the television. I mean, you have a special teams unit that is arguably one of the strengths of this team, and you have Jack Fox who booms a punt essentially the length of the field for it to get downed at the 1 yard line, but Corey Lucas is in the end zone. So now it's a touchback. It was simple execution like that. It was little things that really were the undoing of this team and really prevented you from being 30 minutes away from playing in a Super Bowl, and in my estimation, winning a Super Bowl, beating Kansas City, dethroning what is now set to become a dynasty if they can win this Super Bowl. You were 30 minutes away from dethroning that dynasty. And look, you can point multiple fingers at a lot of different people with really what unfolded in that second half and who you want to blame. But I don't really think it is one singular person or it is one singular position group. You can lay the blame at just about everybody and anybody, whether it's Josh Reynolds, whether it's Jahmyr Gibbs, whether it's Dan Campbell, whether it's Corey Lucas, whether it's whomever. You know, there's a ton of people you could blame who are responsible for this loss. For me, when we get to it, I think there are three specific plays that really showed the unraveling of this team, and I want to save that for a moment. But I want to know, who do you blame, or what position group do you find most responsible for this team losing? And look, like I said, I believe this team was 30 minutes away from winning a Super Bowl. I think if they would have got to that next round, there was no way Kansas City was beating them. And I'm not putting this on what they did with the very first game of the year, because Kansas City is a bit of a different team. You are definitely a different team than when you guys matched up to open the season. But what I'm saying is the way that this team plays and the things that this team does well and what Kansas City does well, you are able to take away, and Kansas City doesn't have the ability to stop you from what you were doing. But who do you blame for this loss? Who do you find most responsible for this loss? Because like I said, I feel like there is a wealth of blame to go around to a lot of different people. I myself have it narrowed down to three specific plays and three specific play calls, and I want to get into that in a moment. But who do you have, or what position group do you have?
Oh, man. It's tough because first half is fine. Obviously, you could argue Dan Campbell could have went for the kill shot in the second quarter instead of kicking the field goal. He was looking. It felt like he wanted to. It was like on the 2 yard line and a little bit beyond. I think you could have tried to pound it in. You were running the ball so well. Could have been a toss. Could have been right up the middle. It could have been something. You could have went for it, and you would have had a big lead. You would have got 4 more points instead of settling for the field goal. But you never know. So that one, he even said after the game that was debatable. So you get to the second half, and you handle yourself well. I think that obviously, you know, the frustrating part is, I know one of these plays is going to be talked about. If Vildor just intercepts the ball and doesn't like have the ball ring off his helmet, if he just intercepts the ball, momentum's killed. And it just goes to show you can't patchwork a secondary. It's impossible. You can only hide it for so long. And, sometimes you realize it's like the best way to describe it verbally is like it's karma. It's like, listen, it's Kindle Vildor. No disrespect, but in the end, against the 49ers, against Brandon Ayuk versus Vildor, Ayuk versus Cam Sutton is such a mismatch. It's literally like us and Howard Stern. That's the difference. It's like the greatest broadcaster of all time versus a local Detroit sports podcast focused on one topic, Detroit sports. It's the biggest difference in the world of spectrums. Ayuk makes the play, and it's, in my opinion, the defense in the second half could not get any pressure. And Dan Campbell said it in his media session to close the season. He said, look, their big dogs all showed up. Nick Bosa, big dog, came up in the second half, made plays. Ayuk, we all talked about it. He was going to feast. We knew it. Deebo Samuel made plays. Brock Purdy, when he needed to run the football, was able to escape. Look, he's not Lamar Jackson, but he made some plays. But I think that the unit to blame is mostly the defense, because obviously the 49ers have a good defense and the Lions are going to move the football here and there. But the defense, I felt like, needed to make that one momentum-changing play like they did in that opening week against Kansas City when they made the run. You remember? Opening week, second half, momentum swinging a little back and forth. Boom! Branch gets that touchdown, and it secures the win. In the second half, Hutchinson, quiet as can be. Nothing. There was literally no stats. And I just felt like if the defense was able to do a little bit more, we might be talking about something different here.
For me, it really comes down to decisions that Dan Campbell made. And look, I'm not one of these people who blames Dan Campbell for going for it or I think the way Dan Campbell coached, and I think the way Dan Campbell has instilled the culture that he wants this team to be, I think all of it deserves a ton of praise. I think him going for it for fourth down, I'll be honest with you, I get excited. There are times where I'm on my couch watching this game unfold, and I look over at my fiance, and I'm like, you think he's going for it? Would you go for it? Like we sit there and we start playing the guessing game. Like, I would go for it. Would you go for it? He's got to go for it, right? And we start going back and forth. We get excited when Dan Campbell goes for it on fourth down, just like this team gets excited for it. I think you could see this team was on shaky ground for that second half. When you go to the end of the first half, 7 seconds left, it is 4th and goal from the 2-yard line. Dan Campbell hesitated. Dan Campbell looks down at his play sheet, looks back up, looks back down at his play sheet, looks back up, looks back down at his play sheet, looks back up. And the whole time, I'm sitting on my couch and I'm talking to my fiance. I'm like, you go for it here. You have to go for it. You go for it. You put the dagger in the heart right now, and you go up by 3 touchdowns. Dan Campbell ends up looking back up from his play sheet after looking down at it for the 5th time and signals for them to go for a field goal. Ends up going for a field goal, and it's successful. So you're still up by 3 scores, but it's not the dagger in the heart that you need. You then come out, and the first drive of the second half, you are at 4th and 2 from San Francisco's 28. You already decided to go for a field goal when you were 2 yards from the end zone. Here, you decide to go for it, and really and truly, you should have attempted a field goal. Yeah, I know it's about a 45-yard field goal, and yeah, I understand the woes of this kicking game, but the smart play here is to go for the field goal. Trade the points back and forth with San Francisco and keep your 3-possession lead. Instead, you attempt to go for it. You've got Reynolds who drops the ball, which very uncharacteristic of him. It was the right play call if Reynolds is successful with receiving the ball and catching it. Like, the play call worked. It didn't work out because your receiver dropped the ball. In the end, I would have went for the field goal. I think the field goal would have been the right choice because you're then again, possessions become incredibly important, and you are keeping them at a 3-possession length if this works. You then go to the first drive of the 4th quarter. It's a 4th and 3. You're at San Francisco's 30. Again, similar to what just happened, what I just talked about, I think you go for the field goal. You're now looking at about a 47, 48-yard field goal. I get it. Bagley does not have the best history and does not have a fantastic percentage. I think it's something like 80% when it's anything over a 45-yard field goal. I think you still take it. At this moment in time, you need points. Your team is showing that they're weeble and wobbling because they're constantly taking body blows. You need points. You go for it here. I think it helps right the ship. It helps put you in a position where you don't necessarily have to make up 10 points down the road. You don't necessarily have to panic. You're able to get points. You're able to steady the ship. You're able to steady your players, and it gets you back on an even footing. Instead, another pass to Reynolds. Reynolds ends up dropping the ball. Again, play call worked. It worked. Your wide receiver did not make the play, but I think you go for the points here. In the end, I think any two of these three plays that are successful, you win the game. One of these two plays that are one of these three plays that are successful, you're tied at least, if not winning the game. I really think it comes down to these fourth down calls that Dan Campbell had. And you could go through any one of these three because, honestly, as this game was unfolding, end of the first half, I said go for the touchdown. Doesn't matter if you make it or not, because if you don't make it, you're putting them essentially in their end zone, right? If you don't make it, they're backed up so deep that they now have to figure something out to do for 7 seconds. You have the ability to possibly force a safety because if they take a knee, they're going to end up kneeling down in the end zone. So they have to come up with some type of play where they're either going to throw the ball away or they've got to figure out a way to run the ball out of the end zone. So you're putting the pressure on them at the end of the first half to do something if you don't score. If you don't score. And this team has been really, really good at putting points on the board from these 4th and goal situations. I feel like you needed to take the touchdown there. You needed to go for it. You then come back out second half, and I feel like there are 2 critical drives where you should have went for the field goal. Instead, you went for the points, and I really feel like this team had a bit of an identity crisis. Your head coach had a bit of an identity crisis with 7 seconds left in the first half, and that trickled down into that second half, and that's when I knew we were in trouble. And like I said, I'm living this as everybody else is. And I'm yelling at the TV, go for the touchdown, end of the first. And then that first drive of the second half, I'm saying, take the field goal. I'm not second guessing this. I'm not coming up here doing revisionist history. I'm writing, like, as this game is going on, I'm writing notes. I'm like, you need to take the field goal here. You need to take the field goal here. And Dan Campbell did not. And I give Dan Campbell a lot of credit because he coaches balls to the wall. The players buy in. He loves these guys. These guys love him. There's a lot of what has made this team work. It's what got you here. And it's a lot of Dan Campbell. It's a lot of his mentality. It's a lot of his coaching decisions. It's a lot of what gets installed, not just every week to week, but it's a lot of what gets installed as far as game planning goes, as far as mentality goes, as far as conditioning goes, as far as the way he coaches these guys, and it's what gets you here. So far be it for me to second guess this man when he's making these calls, but as this game was unfolding, these 3 specific situations, these 3 specific incidences stood out to me, and I felt like they were what changed in this game and what could have been a difference in this game. Specifically, the end of the first half when I felt like Dan Campbell had a bit of an identity crisis with 7 seconds left and it's 4th and goal from the 2. I was really shocked he didn't go for the touchdown. All that being said, it's not all bad. It's not all bad. Like the fact that the Lions lost, the fact that in my estimation you were 30 minutes away from winning a Super Bowl, it not all bad. There were some highlights. What was your highlight from this game? What was either the player or the position group that really stood out to you? Because for me, it was Jameson Williams. We've been looking for a breakout game for this young wide receiver. We were told about all the things this guy could do and all the things that this guy could be. And this guy had at least 3 monster plays. He had the very first touchdown of the game where he ran it down their throats. He had a critical reception at the very end of the game to bring this game within 3. And then there was a play where the ball was thrown up. He went up and he basically snatched it away from the defensive back. It could have been an interception. He snatched it away from the defensive back. He said, no, this is my ball. It was a 50-50 ball. He said, no, this was my ball. You're going to have to fight me for this. And he took it away from him. And these are all things that we want to see from this young wide receiver. I thought he had a hell of a game. I thought this was his breakout game. It's unfortunate that it came in a loss. What was your highlight coming out of this game? Again, very bittersweet because this was a game that they were close to winning, a game that I feel like they should have won. a game that would have led them to winning a Super Bowl, and in the end, just wasn't meant to be. But there was some good stuff to take out of this game. What was some of your good stuff that you took out of this game?
Yeah, it was the first half offensive line performance was stellar. I mean, you knew you need to run the ball. It was offensive genius.
Penny Sewell's a dog, man.
Exactly. I felt like the run game was crazy good in the first half. I wish it would have continued. I thought the play calling was perfect, and I love the fact that Malcolm Rodriguez got the interception. Even though CD Deuce took that penalty, it still was a little bit of aggressiveness. I wish he wouldn't have maybe waved to the crowd, because in the end, the Lions covered up for the mistake. They still scored the touchdown, so it didn't cost him anything. I just felt like they needed to take the penalty that he took, walk off, and keep it going, because they knew that the game was going to continue. It was going to be a full 60-minute game. So I just think that it was disappointing that it didn't end up being a complete 60-minute performance. You know what I mean? And so the first half performance really is one to marvel, and then just turn it off after halftime. Like you said, cuz it was just a little bit disappointing that I felt like Dan Campbell and the coaching staff really kind of made some decisions that are really weird. Like in a situation in which late in the game, okay, let's just say all those decisions. Why don't, with 7 minutes left, kick the field goal to tie it? Or okay, you get the ball, and you take a gamble, like you said, late in the game, and you're forced to take a timeout. I think you should have threw the ball and try to conserve as much clock as possible. It was just so many little things that added up to the Detroit Lions not winning. It was tough. Do you think Dan Campbell should shoulder a little bit of the blame in regards to those decisions you talked about? Because many people, I just cannot discount the fact that really the Lions devalued their kicker. They just never wanted to have a kicker that was going to kick between 45 and 53 consistently. And knowing that, having that situation go down, yeah, you worked around it all year, but it doesn't matter. In the biggest moment, you needed points. And I felt like Dan Campbell, yeah, maybe you could say analytically made decisions that you could argue are correct, but in the end, you're in a high-pressure situation on the road with momentum swinging. That's a lot of pressure on Goff and Reynolds and the others. And then you got Goff scrambling on that other fourth down, and that throw is still in my mind with him rolling. The ball came up 4 yards short. Like it was so like if there's if you guys go back, there's a highlight they show where they pan in and Goff scrambles and you see the side view and he just it almost has the potential to be a dream scenario, and they go and the ball flops.
It was like the ball was shot out of midair.
Yeah.
It was like he was throwing a deflated football. It was weird.
It was weird. So how much blame do you give Dan Campbell?
I think Dan Campbell has to shoulder some of the blame, right? I mean, as far as the kicking position goes, we've known this has been an issue all season long. We've known that this has been a problem since last year. We've known that this has been a problem since the very first year he took over here. And they've never really... It doesn't really feel like they've done a good job to address it. Doesn't feel like they've invested in that position. It kind of feels like, yeah, we'll make do with whatever we got and we'll figure it out as we go along. And that doesn't really work when you get to that level of a game. And that level of a game, everybody's got to be operating. And sometimes you need your kicker. Just ask Buffalo. You need your kicker to come up clutch in pivotal moments. And you need to believe in your kicker. All season long, Dan Campbell and this offense have not believed in this kicker. And whether it was Riley Patterson, whether it was Bagley, whether it was whomever, the kicking position has been the weakest link of this team. You know, every year we go into it and we kind of evaluate positions of need. We look at what positions need to be addressed and what groups. And kicker has been one of those things that I think even we've like touched on it, but we've just kind of overlooked it. And I feel like kicker has been such a back burner problem for this team, and it really came back to bite you in the ass. I mean, a 45-yard field goal shouldn't be something that you have to debate about. Anytime you cross over into the 35-yard line, it should be a gimme 3 points. It shouldn't be one of those things where you got to him and haw and you got to debate going for a field goal. I mean, you just go back to that fourth and goal from the 2. Dan Campbell had to debate whether or not to kick the field goal. Like, you don't trust your field goal kicker there. Like, either you are or you aren't. Like, you can't always have 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And that's kind of what I feel like Dan Campbell in this offense, as well as the special teams, has kind of done with their kicking situation. So, yeah, I think he needs to take some of the blame. I think Brad Holmes needs to take some of the blame. I think as an organization, kicker, as much as you don't necessarily value the position, you need to have somebody that you can rely on. You have to have somebody that you have confidence in. You have to have somebody that you believe can get the job done. So whether they address that this year in free agency or maybe they address it in the draft, I don't know. But you've got to shore that position up because that position has cost you games. That position has cost you points. There are a ton of times where this team has gone for it on fourth and what feels like impossible because they don't believe in their kicker. And that's not a good thing. That puts you in a tough spot. So I feel like at a certain point, you really do need to address that position. You need to get it figured out. It is by far one of those positions that are not valued by really anybody on the team until it's crunch time and they got to make that fateful kick and they come up big. So it'll be interesting to see what they do in the offseason. It'll be interesting to see what they do going into next season because I don't feel like you can roll with Bagley again for a third season. You know what he is. You know what he gives you. And he doesn't give you confidence in moments where you need him to come up big. So there's no reason for him to necessarily be on the roster at this time. So you're going to have to make some adjustments. And if this team has any hope of getting to this point or even further next season, you're going to have to make some adjustments. And speaking of getting further next season, speaking of what lays in the future, Dan Campbell at the end of this game told his players as far as getting to a Super Bowl or getting to this point, he said, I told these guys that this may have been our only shot. Do you believe this team will have its window close like a team like the Philadelphia Eagles? Their window seems to have shut or be shutting after getting to the Super Bowl and then this year basically just kind of limping through and getting into the playoffs only to be blasted by the Buccaneers? Or do you feel like this team is built to be a perennial playoff power, be a team like a Kansas City that has the ability to get there every year? It could be a little bit of a down year. Kansas City having a bit of a down year this year. I think what are they 10-6, I think, going into the playoffs, or maybe 11-5, and that's a bit of a down year for a Kansas City team that operates at a very, very high level, but still able to get in there as a 3 seed, and now they're playing for a Super Bowl. Do you think this team will be more like a Kansas City or more like a Philadelphia Eagles going forward?
Man, because that's the $1 million question. Because if the Lions are a football team that can get back to the postseason regularly, that's fine. But the people want this to be the anger that people felt. People want this to be an upward trajectory. That's just the way in which you see how devastated people are into Tuesday. Now, the news that broke in regards to Ben Johnson returning, I think gives people a lot of confidence that the offense is going to be world class. So that's going to be spectacular. So I think that it's going to be something that you can count on this offense getting better because Jameson Williams is going to now be more explosive and more involved. He has to be unlocked. So I think people are counting on it because that schedule is brutal. You go on the road to Dallas and Houston. You go and you play San Francisco and Miami. That's rough as hell. So that's why I think Dan Campbell, if you gave him some truth serum, they felt like this was the window. You get an opportunity with the. I mean, and here's the thing, guys. We're not haters. We're just realists. And Dan Campbell said it too. First and foremost, he said, this could have been your only shot. Now, he did say he maybe doesn't believe it. He feels like that the team is going to be there. But what he really meant was this 3-year window was open now. When you look at the formula on how teams do it, Relatively low contracts across the board, young team, and some luck. That's the window. That's the chance. Now, Goff's going to make $50 million. You're going to lose Jonah Jackson. You're going to have a different team, and your competition level goes up. So there's some variables that are very, very tough that make it so the challenge of getting back to the NFC Championship is tough. I think it's a playoff team, but I don't know. You know, it's going to, like you said, you're relatively healthy in the postseason too. So I think that it's going to be a perennial playoff team. I just don't know if this team gets back to the NFC Championship, especially with how things are. So it's going to take, like you said, Dan Campbell said it, twice as hard to get back there. And it's just the life in the NFL, guys. It's not even incompetence. It's just life in the NFL. You can't pay everybody. You can't max out Amon-Ra, Penei Sewell, who probably Amon-Ra and Penei are going to have opportunities this year. So it's just going to be overwhelmingly tough. The Lions are going to play good football, probably have a winning record, but you missed an opportunity not only to get to the Super Bowl, but maybe win it. The Kelsey effect, I still say you would have battled, and I just think that Mahomes is all world. Like, literally, he would have just found something to get mad at. Something anybody said at the first game. He just would have got mad at Branch. He just would have made something up. Like, Mahomes is just a totally different guy, like from a different universe. So it's just tough to picture that, but the opportunity was there, and they fumbled it, man. It was so tough to see that so tough they couldn't close the door. They couldn't seal it. I would say basics in terms of what they need, two things, cornerback and kicker. If you could shore that up, I think a lot of Detroit would be very happy in regards to the window. And look, Brad Holmes is a G. He's a genius. He knows what he's doing. The draft will be done well. You'll get probably 4 players that are going to contribute. There's no doubt about that. It's just, so the way in which the cards fell with Joe Burrow being hurt this year was crazy. You're not going to have that opportunity. And Mahomes is Lamar Jackson's going to be hungrier next year. The 49ers, who knows how they continue to look. Philly rebounding. Man, the mountaintop is just that much higher. And it's just going to be tough in my mind. But I truly hope they do fix the cornerback position.
Yeah, look, I think this team, from an infrastructure standpoint, I think they're built to be that perennial powerhouse. They're built to be that playoff contender. I think getting Ben Johnson back, Ben Johnson basically telling teams like, no, I'm going back to Detroit. I want to win a Super Bowl. This is what we're doing. I think that's huge. I think that's massive. I think it tells you about the culture of this team. I think that tells you a lot about the mindset of the guys who are doing the coaching on this team. And I think that has a bit of a trickle down. You listen to Alex Anzalone. Alex Anzalone basically said, look, our goal was to win a Super Bowl. Like, we failed at our goals. Like, I know that everybody else outside of here thought it was get to the playoffs and we were playing with house money, but that wasn't the case. It was to win a Super Bowl. And I think this team has a belief that they deserve to be in those positions to play for those games. That they go into it with the mindset of doing the hard work, doing what has to be done to get themselves there. And I think that will carry over. I think as they go into their offseason, I think you have to address, like you said, a couple of really important positions. One of them is cornerback. You need a number one because Cam Sutton is not that guy. I can't stand watching this guy continuously get burned. Honestly, at this moment in time, I feel like he has Silvadene ointment on standby to use as his burn cream because he's constantly getting toasted. I think you need to add some help for a guy like Aiden Hutchinson. You want to talk about the secondary getting better, just the secondary overall. You add another edge rusher, somebody else who can alleviate some of that pressure from Aiden Hutchinson, somebody else that has to be there has to be an eye on, somebody else that they have to account for. That's going to allow a guy like Aiden Hutchinson, who basically led the league in pressures this year, allow him to get home so he gets more sacks. Or it's going to force a double team on Aiden Hutchinson, who is applying all those pressures, and allow whomever that other edge rusher is, allow him to get home. So I think doing that then condenses that window that the quarterback has to stand in the pocket, which then allows the secondary to look a little bit better because passes aren't coming out on time, passes are being rushed, and the secondary can then try to make a play on the ball. So I think you address both of those positions, and then like you said, you have to figure out what you're doing with kicker. And I myself am not a huge fan of drafting a kicker. Way too many times do you see kickers come into the league and they just kind of wash out. And so it's a wasted draft pick. And at this moment in time, I feel like the Lions have to be really smart with their draft capital. This is not like a few years ago where they had a ton of it and they were able to trade and move all around and go get guys that they targeted. They have to be a little bit more resourceful now. You're drafting later in these drafts. You don't necessarily have the resources that you did before where you could move back in a draft and you could really double up some of those picks. You don't have the ability to do that. So you've got to be smarter. You've got to be a little bit more resourceful. I think you use some of that free agent money that you have because they do have cap space, or they will have cap space. You go out and you get yourself a veteran kicker. Get a guy who's got a couple more years left in the leg, who can get you anything from 45 to 48 yards and bring him in and sign him. And that's what you're really looking for. You don't need a guy to be able to kick 52-yard field goals. Yeah, that'd be nice. Everybody would love that. But you need a guy to make those difficult kicks, those 45, 46, 47, 48-yarders. Get that guy in here. You'll be okay. And honestly, it's one of those things too where figure out a guy who can make the routine kicks, the 32-yarders, the 35-yarders. Those are supposed to be pretty routine for kickers. You need to get a guy who can handle that as well. So I think this team currently is in a pretty good position to weather whatever is coming. And again, Ben Johnson coming back, I think, is a monster deal for this team. I think it tells you a lot about this organization. It tells you a lot about this coaching staff, and it tells you a lot about the mindset of a guy like Ben Johnson. So ecstatic, and it does make this playoff loss. It makes it a little bit more easy to deal with, knowing that you're bringing back a guy who is really, really good and a guy who is very much coveted by other teams in the league. And him coming back, I think, is a big deal, and it really does help strengthen this team for a run next year.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It does. It gives people a lot of hope and things like that. Everybody will get better, even with Dan Campbell, with the organization. I think that there's going to be some tough roster decisions that everybody's got to look at, but I think that number one, based on the playoff run, I think it's fair to ask, at least generally, we'll go into it deeper too, because Jared Goff was asked about it. He does want to return. Let's just say the number is between 50 and 55 million. You okay with the long-term extension? I think the number is not a big deal. The number to me that's most important is years. If you can get him to like 3 years, 150, I could take that. But I don't want to see like 5 years and 250 and all that. I just think that, look, his mobility is something that you don't need a quarterback to be Lamar Jackson. You just need him to be Brock Purdy, where if a play breaks down, you can just get 7 yards. The man falls over his feet, and it's just really bad, and he can't throw on the run. And there's too many times where he just needs things to be pretty well. He just can't do it off script. That's just the way it is. And I think that really precludes you from getting that many more years. So that's my opinion on it. I hope that they do keep him. If he wants to give a discount to maybe keep everybody, and you do maybe that 5th year for if you're in the $40 million range, like take 5 for 200, maybe he'll do it. We'll see, but I don't know. We'll see what that number is going to be. I think it's going to surprise people because people think it's going to be 50. I think it's going to be between 45 and 50.
Yeah, I think 45 and 50 is kind of that sweet spot. And look, I've been talking to a couple of my buddies who were along on this ride along with us, right? Guys who are diehard Lions fans, traveling, going to different games, guys who were at playoff games, guys who were living and dying with every snap. And talking to one of my buddies, I was like, well, how do you feel about Jared Goff? And he's like, well, they're going to have to pay him, obviously. He's like, I just don't feel like giving him that much money. I was like, well, you're going to need to wrap your head around it. I was like, his bottom line is going to be somewhere between 45 and 50, maybe a little bit more. And he's like, I can't pay that man that much money. I was like, well, what are you going to do then? Like, what are you going to do? You can't go out and just find a quarterback. And I was like, on top of that, you got to think about it this way. 45, 50, it's not really that much for your quarterback. That roughly breaks down to somewhere between 15 and 18% of your cap. That's very doable. It's very manageable. This is almost like when Stafford got his deal. And we're all like, cool, Stafford got his deal, highest paid quarterback at the time. But we all knew that wasn't going to last long. And sure enough, it didn't. Like within 6 months, Stafford's contract was incredibly reasonable. Same thing with Jared Goff getting $45 or $50 million. It's going to be incredibly reasonable for what you get. And I think you're right. It's probably more determined on years whether or not this becomes a salty pill, because there are flaws in Jared Goff's game. When that pocket does break down, and it is not incredibly clean, he goes into panic mode. And you can just see his brain kind of shut off, and he's forcing passes, and he's just kind of throwing stuff everywhere. That doesn't really work. That's not ideal. It's not what you need to happen. So I think you're more right than you're wrong. $45, $50 million, and it's going to come down to years. But you have to, if you're a Lions fan, you have to get your brain and you have to get your mind wrapped around what it's going to cost. And if you want this team to continue to perform at this level, Jared Goff's an integral piece of this team. That team respects him. He is a leader of this team. Him and Ben Johnson, they're almost symbiotic. They basically speak through telepathy, and they know what each other's thinking and what each other wants. So you got to be able to bite that pill. You got to be able to swallow that. And as long as you're able to swallow that, I think you'll be okay. And like I said, don't get so wrapped up in the numbers. $45, $50 million with where the cap space is going, with the cap number is going to be, it's only going to be about 15 to 18% of your cap. That is incredibly manageable in the NFL. So don't get too worked up. But I think this team's in a good spot for the future. It's been a hell of a ride, man. Like, if we would have went into this year and we would have said, hey, we're 30 minutes away from playing a Super Bowl, I think we both would have looked at each other and been like, you're on crack. Not happening. This team, the goal was to win a playoff game. This team won 2 playoff games. This team won basically 2.5 playoff games, and they crapped the bed in the final 30 minutes of one. And like I said, if you ask me, this team was good enough to win a Super Bowl this year. I don't know if the road ever gets as easy as it was this year. And look, this was, make no bones about it, this was a pretty simple task for this team this year. You had 2 home games against opponents that you were obviously better than. You went on the road and you were up by 17 points with 30 minutes left to go, and you blew it. You blew it in a spectacular fashion, because it wasn't one thing that went wrong. It was multiple things that went wrong. And still, you had a chance to possibly tie, push that game into overtime. You had a chance to possibly win that game. You didn't. Take it. You learn from it. You come back next year, and hopefully next year we're talking about this team being in a Super Bowl and winning the Super Bowl next year. And we move those goalposts. You know, they're no longer just make it to the playoffs and win a playoff game. It is now make it to the NFC Championship game, win the NFC Championship game, make it to the Super Bowl, win the Super Bowl, and we just kind of keep going in that direction. But all in all, I think you and I both agree. Very successful season. Just did not end the way we wanted it to end. A little bit heartbreaking for us.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to say the least. To get on the doorstep is just so ridiculously crazy, man. To be that close to having all the goals that you wanted as a football team. It was exhilarating. It felt like, oh my gosh, the hope is the biggest thing that makes people happy, is that you get people excited that the biggest thing is going to be possible, that you can compete for a world championship. I think we all pictured being in Vegas watching the Lions do their thing, maybe winning it, hoisting a Lombardi Trophy, feeling like you belong, and then to have it all collapse. It just had shades of like the ultimate disappointment. And the fans of Detroit don't deserve that. That's just, they've been through that. They've been through the chaos and the negativeness and the nastiness. So to have that be the way it felt was crazy. That's why everybody was heartbroken to just that feeling of like, wow, the highest of high. I think people were going crazy too because we tweeted it on our Twitter page at Detroit Podcast because they were getting first downs on 3rd and 12 running the ball. It had the feeling of nothing could go wrong. So, but guys, get used to it. As you know, there's no guarantee that if you get to the Super Bowl next year that you win it. It's just the margin of error is just that slim between winning and losing. And that's why you're a fan of sports, is to go through the heartbreak. Because let me tell you this. This is how crazy sports is. Madeline, my daughter who doesn't even like sports to that degree, was crying. My nephew was crying. I checked in with my sister because I know the boys were big fans. I'm like, how are the boys handling it? They're like, it's awkward, like they're crying. And I'm like, I know. It's like shock. My daughter was like, I think happy because I wasn't going to leave to Vegas. But at the same time, she's like, I can't believe it, because she was screaming and she caught on to what was going on. They were winning and the house was excited and they lost. And I said, I said to my sister, tell the young boys, 11 and 9, welcome to the club. Now you're a Lions fan. And I told my daughter something a little different. I just said, hey, look, it happens. It's something that's a little different. And there's 2 good teams. San Francisco earned it. And I told her, you got to, it's like soccer. You got to play the full game. You can't be happy when you're up 4-0. You got to finish it out. And she understood. And she got the message. Always next year. So that's how much Detroit is enmeshed with that football team. And let's hope that, because in the end, if they do win, that scar that everybody feels, you feel it, I felt it, kids felt it, the community felt it, that scar will make that win, if it happens in our lifetime, that much better. Stick with those Lions, just like you're going to stick with the Detroit Sports Podcast. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at Detroit Podcast. Follow the network. Make sure that anywhere you find great audio content, type in Detroit Sports Podcast, and our content will find you. Because I do feel better, got to debrief, man. And I'll say this too. After covering just a little bit of peeling back the curtain, I hit the wall. I finished. Like I said, I was not used to additional 3 weeks of full-time NFL coverage. I'm good for 18 weeks, as well as all the other stuff. But I was ready for the season to end. I was in Senior Bowl mode, mock draft mode. That was crazy to add a postseason ride to what is already craziness. I hit the wall, and I said to myself, as you're battling, you're like, oh my God, 2 weeks of Super Bowl coverage? There's probably going to be 200 articles across the board, nonstop, and maybe a chance to win. Could you imagine if all that happened and they get to the Super Bowl and lost? It just gets so much more magnetized. So I'll be honest, partly, of course, devastated, felt bad, shocked, obviously got better with Ben Johnson coming back, but I was like I was going to have to ask, like, how the hell do I put in 2 more weeks of work? I almost have less than nothing left. I was going to tell them, I was like, guys, I don't even know how to cover a Super Bowl. Like, what the hell do you guys want to write about? It's crazy. So luckily now, been through it once. The podcast's now been through it once. Let's see what another run could look like in the coming years. Stay with us as we keep grinding along following this football team. Can't wait to fire it up next week on the latest and greatest edition of the Detroit Sports Podcast.